Built Heritage Committee meeting of July 11th, 2023. I'd like to call the members to order. This hybrid meeting is being facilitated through Zoom and is being held on the traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, the original custodians of the unceded land in which the City of Ottawa is located. We extend our respect to all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples for their valuable past and present contributions to this land. Since this meeting of this committee is being streamed live on the Ottawa City Council YouTube channel, I'd like to remind participants to please keep your microphones muted until I call upon you to speak. For those participating here in the committee room, please use the microphone in front of you and keep your computer muted. I will provide each committee member with the opportunity to ask questions or comment on each item in the order in which they raise their hand in Zoom. The committee coordinator and I will be watching for those cues. Members are also reminded to submit any motions, visual supports, or declarations of interest in writing to the coordinator at their earliest convenience. Although the deadlines have passed for residents to register to speak and provide written submissions, they still can provide written submissions to council. The report considered today will be submitted to Ottawa City Council tomorrow on July 12th, 2023. A reminder that if participants are having technical issues with their Zoom connection, they may call in using the backup telephone number provided by the coordinator. I have received regrets from Vice Chair Plante, Councillor Kelly, and Member Legault. Could the committee coordinator please call the roll? A reminder to members to unmute themselves when they are called.
Councillor Kelly, Member Doty.
Here.
Member Quinn.
Here.
Councillor Troster.
Here.
Member Madigan.
Here.
Councillor Leeper.
Good morning.
Member Legault, Vice Chair Plante, Chair King.
Here.
Quorum, Chair.
Thank you so much. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none, are the minutes of Tuesday, June 13th, 2023 confirmed? Confirmed. The only only substantive item in front of us is an application for new construction at 480 Cloverdale Road, a property designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act and located in the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District. I do have both a motion as well as a direction to introduce. My understanding is that under Section 79 of the procedure bylaw, I can introduce a motion as long as I have concurrence of the committee. And of course, of Vice Chair Plante, who would typically move motions, is not here. So do I have the consent? Thank you so much. It is. So I have both a motion and a direction. The first motion is concerning Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District and new zoning bylaw. It reads, whereas the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District Plan, Secondary Plan, and the City of Ottawa Official Plan all recognize the significance of the Rockcliffe Park HCD as a cultural landscape, whereas the new zoning bylaw provides an opportunity to ensure consistency between these documents. Therefore, be it resolved that consistency with the objectives and policies of the official plan, Rockcliffe Park Secondary Plan, and Heritage Conservation District Plan be considered through the development of the new zoning bylaw. And the direction that I have concerning this motion is to direct staff to consider ways of ensuring compliance with approved landscape plans in Rockcliffe Park through the development of the Ontario Heritage Act enforcement strategy. So those are both the motions and directions that I'm going to introduce, and I will speak to them during debate. At this point, I'd like to invite staff to provide a presentation on this file. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Chair, Vice Chair, committee members. Before us is an application to alter 480 Cloverdale Road, a property designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act and located in the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District. Next slide, please. The subject property is outlined in red on this slide. It's a grade 2 property located in Ward 12 on the east side of Cloverdale Road. It is adjacent to grade 1 properties 484 Cloverdale and 560 Hillsdale to the north, the vacant property to the south, and the Rockcliffe Lawn Tennis Club to the east. The property is 2,080 square meters in area and significantly larger than many of the surrounding lots in the streetscape. Next slide, please. The lot has been vacant since 2003, and as you can see in these existing condition images, it is heavily vegetated, and there's also a natural downward sloping grade towards the rear or east elevation. Next slide, please. So I'll review a bit of background on this slide. The top left image shows the footprint of the one-story dwelling that existed on the property until it was demolished along with its southern neighbor in 2003. The top right image shows the initial proposal that was considered by the Built Heritage Subcommittee in November of 2021. Staff recommended approval of the application conditional upon the massing of the north elevation being reconfigured and the overall length of the building being reduced. But given the outstanding issues, the Built Heritage Subcommittee at the time moved to defer a decision with the agreement of the applicant. And then at the bottom left there, you'll see that the applicant came back with a revised proposal in February 2022, which both Built Heritage Subcommittee and Council refused on staff's recommendation, as it did not address the concerns from the previous iteration. In March 2022, the applicant filed a notice of appeal to the Ontario Land Tribunal, which was withdrawn in March of this year. And finally, the subject proposal, which is shown on the bottom right there, was submitted in April of this year. Next slide, please. So although the proposal evaluated in this report is a new application, there are changes between this proposal and the previous iteration that are worth noting. These include transposing the north and the south elevations so that the garage volume, which is closest to the street, is located away from the neighboring grade 1 property. Further revising the volume of the floating mass and tucking it further back between the north and the south wings. Reducing the total length of the building by 3.2 meters. And increasing the front yard setback by 2 meters and the rear yard setback by 1.2 meters. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the elevations for the proposed building. The proposed building consists of a series of flat roofed pavilions that link to create an H-shaped volume. You can see from the elevations that the proposed dwelling is built into the existing sloping topography, which results in a 2-story structure along Cloverdale Road with a walkout basement towards the tennis club property, which results in 3 stories being exposed for approximately half the length of the north wing and most of the east or rear elevation. You can also see here that the proposed massing is arranged so that the garage volume, which protrudes closer to the street than the rest of the building, is the volume that's furthest from the adjacent grade 1 property. Next slide, please. Here we have a streetscape elevation and rendering along Cloverdale Road that demonstrates how the proposed dwelling will interact with the neighboring grade 1 property. The proposed 2-story height along Cloverdale, complementary natural material palette, the siding, and the landscaping allow for adequate spacing between the properties and allow the neighboring grade 1 property to remain a focal point along Cloverdale Road. Next slide, please. So as part of this, staff are also recommending approval of the proposed landscape program, which includes a combination of formal at-grade and sunken gardens and unprogrammed lawn space to maintain the existing grade and provide a generous amount of soft landscaping. Approximately 7% of the property will be hardscaped with permeable materials to provide for walkways and a driveway. The applicant is also proposing the retention of 50 of 54 existing trees and the planting of 57 new coniferous and deciduous species as well as a decorative rear yard roof and ground pond. Next slide, please. So staff are of the opinion that this proposal complies with the Rockcliffe Park HCD policies and guidelines and the standards and guidelines for the conservation of historic places in Canada, and that it will have little impact on the character of the HCD. In staff's opinion, the arrangement of the proposed volume and the siting of the new house, as well as its extensive landscaping, will help mitigate impacts related to the difference in size between this property and the adjacent grade 1 dwelling. Next slide, please. In terms of consultation, the application submission materials were posted on DevApps. The Rockcliffe Park Residents Association was notified of the application and has provided comments against its approval. And Heritage Ottawa and neighbors within 30 meters were also notified of the application, as well as Chair King. Next slide, please. In conclusion, staff are recommending approval of the proposed new construction and landscaping. As conditions of approval, staff are requesting the submission of samples of all final exterior materials, the submission of a construction staging plan, the submission and acceptance of a final tree information report and landscape plan to the satisfaction of the city's forester, and the submission and acceptance of a planting plan demonstrating the size and species of the proposed new plantings to the satisfaction of the city's forester and heritage planning staff. Staff is also requesting that authority be delegated for minor design changes that might arise, and that the heritage permit be approved with a 2-year expiry date. Next slide, please. And that concludes this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that in-depth presentation. We did receive correspondence on this item from Kim Ratushny, a resident who is opposed, as well as Susan Peterson on behalf of Rockcliffe Park Heritage Outreach Committee, who is also opposed. We do have a number of registered speakers. We have the application team, and I believe that Andrew Reeves, of the architect for Linebox Studio, does have a presentation for the committee.
Yes, I do. So, hi, thank you, Chair and Heritage Subcommittee. It's a privilege to be in front of you guys and present our perspective as the architects on this file. I'll do my best to get through. I tend to ramble, but I'll stick to my 2 minutes and pass it on to John. John will bring the heritage perspective, and I'll try to negotiate with you guys about the slide transitions. I live in the neighborhood. My kids go to Rockcliffe Public and play tennis in the neighborhood, so it's definitely an area that is of no surprise that this is a unique site, a unique street, and a unique community, and it comes with great responsibility as an architect to have the privilege to even look at a property of this magnitude and such an established neighborhood. For me, my perspective as the architect is context, and my definition of context is everything woven properly together, not just one particular item. I see it as the client, obviously, the site, wind, sun, built environment, the street, the community, Ottawa as a whole. And I believe as an architect, it's your responsibility to try to come up with the best resolve with all the pressures that are impacted on this site, with its client and with its community. Next slide, please. We also have to deal with the technical of city bylaws, dealing with city staff, and I definitely want to take a moment to thank city staff for constantly, consistently having open dialogue with us and drawing a line where they felt things needed to be drawn and being very clear on their issues. It's been a process, but I do believe that the end result proves that proper dialogue and interaction only makes the design that much better. For us, we see Rockcliffe as probably the most unique neighborhood in Ottawa, if not Ontario, as an example of buildings built of their time, an amazing representation of those styles. Everything from American colonial to modernism to postmodernism. I think Rockcliffe has an amazing example of homes that can represent any one of these styles, including Art Massey House, which reached heritage designation as the international style of beautiful modernist building on stilts. So Rockcliffe for me is an example of proper design over time and design of its time. So we approach this site very much of that. We walk the properties. We walk the properties with city. We walk the properties our own. We took note of massing along the streetscape itself. Yes, our neighboring properties, but also the buildings around us. So try to figure out how we can come up with the best solution overall. Next slide, please. Obviously, I think we've all appreciated this site is complicated. One more slide would be great. I think we know the neighborhoods. We know that massing around this site has 3-story buildings. It has contemporary houses. It has mid-century modern houses. It has garages facing the street. It's a quite eclectic street, and I personally find that's why it's exciting. If we go to the next slide, I'll explain more of the landscaping. I think City addressed this, which was accurate and unique. The design does respond to the sun. It does respond to our clients', I would say, unique cultural interests of things facing south and where sun comes in and how you manipulate that. The design does bend and twist around the existing landscape with the intention to keep majority, if not almost all, existing mature trees. I think we're at 51, we're adding 57, and that was with the consultation with neighbors of where to add these trees. The idea was to screen as much as we can from all neighboring properties to create that forest-like feel. We are not altering any existing grades in this application, and we're trying to screen this site from the tennis club and future maybe homes around us. So what's happening now, including our neighboring down to the south, is what's going to be there. So we have to try to figure out how to design something that appreciates all aspects and all inputs and all pressures onto the design. Next slide, please. So for us, it's about the public realm, and it's about walking up and down the street. It's about a client that wants to raise a family in Rockcliffe. It's about a client that wants their family to live with them in Rockcliffe. It's about the experience along this street. And it's not a particular one project, it's how it all is woven in. And yes, including maybe the street that next to the right of us that will be there. It's about creating a nice community and about creating something that we feel form and function works overall and responds to the overall versus one particular item. We like to believe this image shows that we are going to screen the building with existing natural landscape. We are going to add all the landscape elements to help keep that forest-like feel. There's going to be no change in existing grade. The front door is dominant. The garage is switched so that it doesn't become a front-facing element. The massing is situated as such to get away from the grade 1 heritage home. Next slide, please. We're using natural material, brick, copper, cedar, natural stone. The client is definitely committed to make a building of its time and a building that will last this time. And I fundamentally believe it is correct in the Rockcliffe design guidelines that in order to do that, a respect to proper architecture and proper materials is there. Next slide.
And Andrew, your time has expired.
Okay, I'll just finish with this application also has no minor variances required, and it's been confirmed by FO10, including sloping. And the green roof is not a patio, it's a green roof. Those are two questions that people asked in the past. Thank you, sorry for rambling.
No problem, thank you. So are there any questions for Andrew? Seeing none, thank you so much. And I know that there's another associated presentation on this file on behalf of the applicant from John Stewart of Commonwealth.
Chair King and members of the Built Heritage Committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak. The Heritage Assessment was prepared by Commonwealth. Based on the assessment, it was concluded that the design is respectful of the Rockcliffe Park Conservation Guidelines and is generally consistent with the applicable Parks Canada standards and guidelines. The HIA concurs with the city's assessment and concludes that the plan for 480 Cloverdale Avenue is in keeping with the character-defining attributes of the district, including strong landscape of individual properties, in that the existing grades are maintained, the siting of the built form is strategically organized to retain 50 of the 54 existing trees with sufficient setback to protect roots during zoning and construction. This approach to the massing also addresses the relationship to the side yards between neighboring properties and picturesque views both into and out of the property. Another attribute, the new house acknowledges and is compatible with the grade 1 building next door with the generosity of space.
Oh my God.
And the visual flow of the spaces from one property to the next by continuous planting rather than hard fence lines, and maintaining the estate qualities and park setting envisioned by Kiefer. Slide 2, please. Acknowledging the grade 1 building next door, the height and mass of the new building has been adjusted and broken up with a plan orientation and that follows the siting of the original demolished property. You see the demolished property with the entrance and the side garage and the building setback behind the grade 1 building next door. The rich mix of building types and styles from an era, from all eras, is a defining attribute. As recommended in the district plan, the design of the new house is of its own time, but harmonizes with its setting in its presentation and generous use of noble materials, including limestone, copper, and wood. While the proposed house does not exhibit the picturesque principles found in some parts of the HCD, it is certainly within the vocabulary of modern homes that existed before and after designation and the guidelines were implemented. A number of these homes are acknowledged as contributing to the district's value. The unobtrusive siting of the house on the street and the generous spacing relative to the neighboring buildings is another defined attribute. The concept of link pods capitalizes on the site's unique characteristics, bucolic setting, mature woodlot, significant existing grades, all of which are attributes of Rockcliffe Park DNA. Next slide, please. The home is large with a GFA of 759 meters square. It takes full advantage of its setting, which is significantly larger than the surrounding lots along the street. The building site and form are not an anomaly. Throughout Rockcliffe, there are equivalent scaled homes which are compatible and consistent, contributing to their streetscapes and neighboring properties. Next slide, please. The following stats provide a comparison as part of the mitigation and the effort to respond to comments from the city and the community. Over the course of the design, mitigation measures have been incorporated to reduce the height, the visual impact of the building size along the north, and increase setbacks. Next slide, please. The design responds to a program set out by the owner to create a home that can accommodate 3 generations of family. A guiding principle of the design approach is the maintenance of nearly all of the existing mature trees and shrubs and the addition of plantings to create a distinct environment that will create privacy and support the naturalistic character between properties and the tennis court at the rear of the lot. Next slide, please. The new construction proposed for the site follows the management guidelines for the district in that the siting, form, materials, and detailing are sympathetic and compatible with the surrounding natural and cultural environment as seen from the tennis court and from the street. Next slide, please. The design results in a unique residential experience, which is well within the normal parameters of the Heritage Conservation District and with regards to understanding prominence on the street, setbacks, height, lot coverage, and preservation of the existing vegetation. The proposed house is compatible with the existing streetscape in its height, dimensions, function as a private family residence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. Are there any questions for John from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for your presentation. The next registered speaker is Kim Ratushny. And I believe, Kim, you've been promoted. So at this point, you might be able to turn on your video and your audio. Good morning. And you have 5 minutes. I think you're muted.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'm having trouble, but good morning. My name is Kim Ratushny, and I am a lawyer in the Ottawa area. I am appearing today along with my husband, Kent Manderville. We are the registered owners of and reside at 484 Cloverdale Road, which is a grade 1 property in the associated streetscape and immediately adjacent to the applicant's property at 480 Cloverdale. Both our grade 1 property at 484 Cloverdale and the applicant's property at 480 Cloverdale are situated within the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District. Both our property at 484 Cloverdale and the applicant's property at 480 Cloverdale are subject to the legal requirements imposed by the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District Plan as approved by City of Ottawa bylaw number 2016-89 and brought into full force and effect in 2019 pursuant to the processes in Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. We recognize that our continued opposition to the latest proposed construction could be viewed as NIMBY, or not in my backyard. However, we sincerely believe that the protection of Rockcliffe Park's heritage green space is at stake. We submit that a central purpose of Rockcliffe Park's Heritage Conservation District designation is to guard against 2 large buildings taking over Rockcliffe Park's heritage green spaces. It is a fundamental principle of administrative law that as a statutory decision maker, the committee on behalf of the City of Ottawa has no more discretion to issue a heritage permit than what has been granted to you under the governing legislative scheme. You do not have absolute discretion to make a decision on any ground or for any reason that is suggested to you. Any decision you make must comply with the specific constraints imposed by the governing legislative scheme. Section 7.4.2 sub 3 of the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District Plan imposes such a determinative statutory test for this application under the statutory scheme of Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Excerpts from Section 7.4.2 sub 3 of the plan that restrict new building mass and height in our Cloverdale streetscape read as follows, and I quote, "Construction of new buildings will only be permitted when the height and mass of the new building are consistent with the grade 1 buildings in the associated streetscape. The term consistent is used and not compatible. The term compatible is used elsewhere in Section 7.4.2 sub 3. The Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District Plan and the Ontario Heritage Act limit the mass and height of any new construction at 480 Cloverdale. Such construction must be consistent with the mass and height of our home at 484 Cloverdale, which is the only remaining grade 1 home in the associated streetscape as defined in the plan. I will first address the proposed building mass. To demonstrate drastically non-compliant building mass of the proposed construction, we refer this committee to the entirety of our July 8th, 2023 letter to you and highlight the enclosed reports that demonstrate that the proposed building mass of the previous application at 480 Cloverdale in 2022 was 3.54 times more massive. I'll repeat that, 3.54 times more massive than our adjacent comparator grade 1 home. We have explained in our July 8th letter to you why the 2022 building massing reports continue to provide evidence of drastically non-compliant building mass in respect of this latest application in 2023. I will now address the proposed building height. To demonstrate drastically non-compliant building height of the proposed construction, we refer you to the entirety of our July 8th, 2023 letter and highlight that unlike much of the proposed new building height at 480 Cloverdale, our grade 1 comparator home never at any point exposes 3 full stories of building above ground. In conclusion, as the City of Ottawa is statute bound in 2023 to apply the mandatory mass and height limits in Section 7.4.2 sub 3 of the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District Plan, it is our respectful submission that the City of Ottawa continues to have no legal authority to issue a heritage permit for this new application. As the owner of the Grade 1 property expressly referred to in the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District Plan, adopted by the City of Ottawa pursuant to Bylaw 2016-89 and in full force and effect in 2023 following the statutory processes in Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act, we are a party withstanding to this proceeding. In respect of past and ongoing proposed construction at 480 Cloverdale, we rely on all of our written and oral submissions to date to officials of the City of Ottawa, beginning on November 16th, 2021, continuing through to our written correspondence to this committee and City Council on July 8th, 2023, and continuing through to our oral submissions to this committee today, July 11th, 2023. Should the committee choose to grant the requested heritage permit, respectfully, the committee would be acting ultra vires. The committee would be acting beyond its statutory authority, and this necessarily would render such a decision by the committee unreasonable and without statutory jurisdiction. Such a decision would be vulnerable in court on judicial review. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your deputation. Are there any questions for Ms. Ratushny? Seeing none, thank you so much for your deputation. The next registered speaker is Kent Manderville.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, and you do have 5 minutes for your deputation.
You know what, Chairman King, I'm not going to take the 5 minutes. I only put my name forward just to make sure that Kim had her say. Obviously, she spoke for me. She made a lot of points that I would have made as well. So in the spirit of efficiency, I won't take the full 5 minutes, but I did want to say, and I appreciate the architect's words on this, but, you know, my wife and I, we've been in the neighborhood for, you know, it's almost 20 years. Our kids went to RPRA as well. We've been volunteers in the neighborhood for a number of years. And we feel very strongly about this position, and it's a special place. We know why the applicant would want to build there. And we just ask that, you know, to Kim's point, that gets represented. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your deputation. Are there any questions for Mr. Manderville? Seeing none, thank you so much for your delegation. And the next registered speaker is Michelle Haim. And we don't see Michelle on Zoom yet. So I think we'll advance to Tony and Dorina Brunst. And if Michelle does join the call, then we'll promote her afterwards. And Tony and Doranda Brunst are also not online. Noting that they're not, we have gone through the registered speakers list. So we will just advance now to the committee. Does the committee have any questions for staff? And I see that member Madigan has raised his hand.
Yes, Chair. In the presentation, there's a point raised about the definitions of the zoning or the Heritage Conservation District with aspects of the wording being consistent and versus compatible. The presentations have put forth that the design is compatible, but the bylaw wording is consistency. And the point being brought that the height and massing should be consistent. Staff have recommended that things are in compliance, but I'm not quite understanding to what degree is there latitude in interpreting compatibility as being consistent in the way the building has been designed in height and mass. How much variation can there be between height and massing to be consistent versus just being compatible?
And I will defer that question to staff. I'll just speak first to the intention of my motion, which is just to seek consistency, especially around areas of height with the zoning bylaw. I know that we're going to have a little bit more discussion about that since we do have Chair Leeper around the table as a member of this committee, and I'm in agreement that we should have further debate at all levels about that, especially as we are looking at the creation of a new zoning bylaw to accommodate our new official plan. So that is the idea behind my motion, but I'll defer to staff on your question, Member Madigan.
Thank you, Chair. To Member Madigan. So when we were looking at consistency of this property, we looked at the arrangement of the volumes, what the massing shows, not just with the property itself, but also with the streetscape and with the neighboring grade 1 property. And what we determined was that the front yard setback is consistent with the neighboring setback. And it allows a massing that provides generous spacing between the neighboring property and the proposed building. One of the biggest differences I would say from this iteration and previous iterations is that garage volume is now arranged to be, which is the longest volume, is now arranged to be transposed to the south side instead of the north side. And what that has done is it has allowed space between the properties to allow landscape continuity. It has also allowed the grade 1 property to remain prominent in the streetscape. In terms of height, so yes, the proposed 2-story flat roof is approximately 0.06 meters taller than the neighboring grade 1 property when measured from the base of the ground to the top of the neighbor's gabled roof. But generally that 2-story height is consistent with the grade 1 property in the streetscape.
Just a follow-up question on that, Chair, to the staff member. So with respect to massing, because it's been broken up and pulled away from the grade 1 house, that's interpreted then as being consistent and not sort of a hard calculation that the massing has to be approximately equal to the massing of the grade 1 house or within a certain percentage increased.
Yes, that's correct. There are no, we don't evaluate specific numbers through the HCD plan. That's prescriptive. It's done through the zoning. What we look at is consistency through setbacks and height.
Okay, and just to follow one last point. So in general, for comparable projects, that has been the same similar interpretation when comparing a new project to the surrounding grade 1 buildings.
Yes, I would say that's consistent with our approach, but I'll let Leslie comment further.
Thank you.
Excuse me, sorry. I would agree. I think that's consistent with our approach. And I think Luis's comment about the idea that, the HCD plan is not a zoning bylaw. It's not as specific as a zoning bylaw that has, maximum height is 9 meters. It doesn't talk about that. It's about mitigating impacts. It's about what is the visual impact? What is the impact on the landscape? And so in this instance, it's staff's opinion that given the vastly different lot context here, where we have a smaller lot with a smaller house and then a significantly larger lot, it would be somewhat unreasonable to require a house that would be the same size as the house next door when the lot is, I don't know, probably double or triple the size. So we looked at consistency from the public realm as a measure of how to help with the streetscape piece in terms of how you experience the district and how you ensure that the grade 1 building remains the dominant presence in the streetscape.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I know that Michelle Heyman has joined us for her delegation. So what I'm going to suggest with the concurrence of committee is that we continue with Member Quinn's questions, and she has her hand raised to just ensure continuity, and then go back briefly for another delegation and then resume with questions. So Member Quinn.
Thank you, Chair. My colleague, Mr. Madigan, asked my questions and addressed the concerns that I had. So at this point, I think I might like to make an general comment at the end, but for now, my question's been answered. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So now we can go back to our registered speaker, Michelle Heyman.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
I apologize for the challenges. I thought I was in the room, and therefore that's why, trust me, the frustration and stress level was immense. So thank you for waiting for me. I very much appreciate it. So I'll start by saying my name is Michelle Heyman, and I'm Heritage VP for the Rockcliffe Park Residents Association. My comments are related not only to the effect of this application on the neighboring grade 1 home on the associated streetscape, but on the negative impact to the entire Heritage Conservation District. Please refer to my complete submission titled Document 14, RPRA Formal Comments dated June 29, 2023. The question is not, has the applicant made changes, but has the applicant made enough changes to be compliant with the Heritage Conservation District Plan, hereafter called the plan? The Heritage Committee believes they still have not. There has been no reduction in lot coverage, which is still at 22%, and only a GFA reduction of 18.2 meters squared, less than 2%. When the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Committee provides comments on an application, we are directed in section 4.1 of the plan. We use the same metrics as city heritage planners. Today, I will focus on the plan and the City of Ottawa zoning bylaws. See my submission for full analysis. Note that in a heritage conservation district, it is not enough to be compliant with the zoning bylaws. It is the more restrictive and limiting language of the plan which must be used to determine if a heritage permit can be issued. Various sections of the plan discuss the importance of mass and height as key determinants of compliance. Please see my submission. Of particular importance is section 7.2.3, which states construction of new buildings will only be permitted when the new building does not detract from the historic landscape characteristics of the associated streetscape. The height and mass of the new building are consistent with the grade 1 buildings on the associated streetscape, and the siding and materials of the new building are compatible with the grade 1 buildings in the associated streetscape. Some could argue that a larger lot would permit a larger home, which is erroneous. It is imperative to understand that within the Heritage Conservation District, the grade 1 home on the associated streetscape is the limiting metric. It does not matter that the zoning bylaw may permit a larger home. The plan does not. The lot next door could be the size of Ontario, and the permitted mass of the house would still have to be consistent with the grade 1 home on the associated streetscape. In this case, the proposed structure is 3.54 times larger in mass than the grade 1 home on the associated streetscape, and is therefore not consistent and not compliant with the plan. Various sections of the plan discuss the importance of soft and green landscaping as key determinants of compliance. Please see my submission for greater details. While many of the trees will be preserved, the flow between the trees to open space in the park-like setting will be obscured by the obtrusive mass of the proposed design, which continues to negatively impact the view shed of 484 Cloverdale, the tennis courts, neighbors, and the public realm along Cloverdale and Lansdowne. Landscaping should not be used as a mitigating measure. It is a feature in itself. Mitigation implies there is something wrong with the original design. The zoning bylaw is an important reference for the Heritage Committee because if an application is not compliant with zoning, it must certainly not be compliant with the Heritage Conservation District Plan. Two key metrics are at the maximum limit, including the gross floor area and the FSI. For this reason, the Heritage Committee, through the Heritage Planner, asked the applicant to clearly demonstrate the GFA figures for each of the floors separately, including the lower floor, what is called a basement by the applicant. We have not received an answer. Exception 1259 requires that double-story open space be counted as 2 floors, which increases the GFA and FSI. We do not know if this was properly counted. If not, the application is grossly over the permissible GFA and FSI. We also raised the issue as to whether the basement was in fact a basement. Note that the lowest floor is situated only 6.5 centimeters, the length of my pinky, below the measurement to qualify as a basement. Such a small margin can easily disappear during construction, in which case the lower floor would count towards the GFA and FSI, and the house would grossly exceed what is permissible. We asked Heritage staff to query zoning compliance. The zoning officer communicated that compliance with zoning would only be determined until a building permit is issued. If at that point it is determined not to be compliant, it will be too late and the structure will have received a heritage permit. The applicant will then seek a variance and the end result will be the erosion of our heritage conservation district. A third and final area of concern is inconsistent and incomplete documentation as outlined in my submission. For example, some of the elevation drawings included on Dev apps are old and no longer apply. The comparative height analysis, including the grade 1 house, does not allow for a determination of the actual height of the grade 1 home, since the above sea level measurement is given, but no base measurement is given. How is the public or the city expected to make a decision based on incomplete and inconsistent information? In conclusion, you are being asked to approve an application that has various inconsistencies, is lacking key information, with a strong possibility of not complying with zoning, and most importantly, not being compliant with various sections of the Heritage Conservation District Plan. Is this reasonable? We submit that it is not and respectfully request that this application be denied. This application is one of many examples of how the green spaces supposedly protected under the statutes of the plan are being rapidly eroded by massive developments that are not in keeping with the objectives of the plan. Approving this application would set an erroneous precedence that would permit future development that is in violation of the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District Plan, thereby having a negative effect on every streetscape in the Heritage Conservation District. Please help us to conserve the heritage attributes of our beautiful community so that it is still here to enjoy by all and recognizable for its park-like setting for years to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your delegation. Are there any questions from the committee for Michelle? Seeing none, thank you so much for your delegation. And we will resume as committee in terms of staff questions. Are there any other members who have questions for staff? Seeing none, I do have a few questions. So I was just wondering if staff could explain the grading difference and how does the grading impact this specific application? And I'm wondering if you can explain the difference between basement level and ground level.
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of grade affecting this property, it does naturally slope downward to expose more of the proposed building as you go towards the back of the site. That being said, grade is calculated through the zoning bylaw, which defines what constitutes a basement for zoning purposes. And the Heritage Conservation District Plan itself, in terms of grading, asks or requires that the existing grades be maintained. So when we were evaluating this application, we determined that the proposed building does maintain and works with the existing grades on the site.
Thank you for that. When we have a double lot, because we're hearing about this concern from residents, what is the average acceptable size that we can build?
So there isn't an exact number that we could provide. There aren't any specific guidelines or policies in the HCD plan that speak to double lots. But what we do look at is the lot and its context and its size in relation with the streetscape and in relation with any other grade 1 properties along the streetscape itself.
Okay. Based on the tools that city staff have in terms of planning and heritage tools, can we reduce the size of a proposal based on the home next door?
So we certainly do look at the grade 1 property and consider it when evaluating applications. And I think the reduction of size is something that staff can consider when it's warranted. But again, there are so many different considerations, including the existing lot size that we consider.
Okay. Given the history of this application, we know there's been multiple iterations. Can you share why this new application is different and in staff's mind acceptable?
Sure, yeah. So I think the style itself is actually quite similar to previous iterations that we've seen. It employs that general H shape, and it's not significantly smaller. But I think the biggest difference between this proposal and the last is that garage volume is transposed, so that the longest part of the house is now the furthest part from the adjacent grade 1 property. And what that's allowed this proposal to do is provide that continuity in landscape between the two properties, and it's allowed that grade 1 property to remain prominent along the streetscape.
Were there other mitigations that were discussed and changed to help this application get to the state where staff is recommending approval?
The biggest one I would say is the change in the massing, so the arrangement in the volumes, but there were other minor considerations, including some landscaping changes, addition of additional plantings, as well as there was previously a rooftop terrace proposed at the front, and that's just a green roof now.
Okay. I was wondering if you could speak in more detail of the condition around landscaping and why that's important.
Sure, yeah. So the landscaping conditions are twofold. So we're asking for a finalized landscape plan, a tree information report, as well as a planting plan. And that's to ensure that the existing trees, so the 50 of 54 that are proposed to be maintained, are protected during the construction phase. And then the second part of that is to ensure that whatever plantings are finalized for this property are an appropriate species and size in review with our arborist to ensure that they do act as an appropriate buffer to other properties.
Okay. This might be a question for legal because I think there was a statement during one of the deputations about our authority being ultra vires or outside of our control. So I was just wondering about the accuracy of that statement.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I will refer to Ms. Christine Enta.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Ontario Heritage Act provides the statutory authority to Ottawa City Council to approve permits or refuse permits that are applied for within an HCD. But it's not accurate, in my opinion, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much. And I guess the last question I had was for staff to speak to the changes that have been made to the front yard setback.
Sure. So the front yard setback is, I'm just going to confirm, it's 8.5, sorry. I believe it's 8.5 meters, sorry, the 8.75 meters. And that is consistent with the front yard setback of the neighboring grade 1 property at its closest point to the street.
Thank you so much. Those are my questions, especially the ones around the lot size and the grading, which I think feeds into the motion that I had initially presented. Are there any other questions for staff on this file? Seeing none, are there any comments on this file? And I believe that I know Member Quinn had suggested that she might have some comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I just want to say that I've been, as a member of the previous Built Heritage Subcommittee, I've seen this file before. And when it was before us in February of 2022, although I'm fairly familiar with this area of Rockcliffe Park, I did take the time to go and walk around the neighborhood and just get a sense of what this development is going to mean in terms of its impact on the public realm, which I think really is the important factor. And although it is, I can certainly appreciate Ms. Ratushny's concerns about massing, but the reason I'm going to be able to support the staff recommendation today is because I believe that the important impact is the streetscape for this inside lot. And there really is no impact to the public realm, no sense of how the back end of this house is going to be viewed by public to get a sense of the qualities of Rockcliffe Park, that are being preserved through the Heritage Conservation District Plan. And I do appreciate the effort to make changes to the design that we saw last year. And I think they're important changes, and they are going to make a difference to the impact in terms of setback, the moving of the garage. I think those have value. And again, I just reiterate that the significance in the public realm is minimal. So I just wanted to let you know that those are the reasons behind primary reasons. I also wanted to, one last point. One of the speakers mentioned that the massing takes up 22% of the lot coverage, even with the new iteration before us. But I saw in much of the documentation with this file, which I looked at all of it, with the reviewing 8 properties around this one, only one other has a lot coverage that is less than 22%, and it's the neighboring property at 480. All of the rest are over, some up to 29% of the lot coverage. So just to say that I don't think is inconsistent with what's before us. Anyway, thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much. Does anybody else have comments before we look at an amending motion that's before us from Councillor Leeper? I don't see anybody else, but I do have a few comments with my interest as being the councillor for the area. I really do want to thank staff and the community for all the work that they've undertaken on this file. Not unlike Member Quinn, I experienced a lot of discussion and debate around this as well. And we know that there's a pretty detailed chronology that staff has laid out. We know that an initial version of this application was submitted and considered by the Built Heritage Subcommittee in November 2021. Staff recommended approval of the application conditional upon the massing of the north elevation being reconfigured and the overall length of the building being reduced. Given the issues with the application, the subcommittee at the time moved to defer a decision with the agreement of the applicant. The deferral was intended to allow the applicant time to consider changes to the proposal in consultation with staff, neighbors, and the Residents Association. A revised application was brought to the Built Heritage Subcommittee in February 2022. Staff recommended refusal of that application as the applicant had not addressed the concerns raised in the previous iteration. At that subcommittee meeting, staff recommended that the proposal could be more compliant with the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation Plan by 1, removing the floating volume at the rear, 2, reorganizing some of the massing to the south side of the lot, or rotating a portion of the building away from the north lot line. Both the subcommittee and council refused that application on staff's recommendation. In March 2022, the applicant filed a notice of appeal to the Ontario Land Tribunal. This appeal was withdrawn in March 2023. The proposal evaluated in the report before us is a new application under Section 42 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Notwithstanding, it was offered in the context of an ongoing matter before the Ontario Land Tribunal as a possible resolution, and therefore significant changes between this proposal and the previous iteration are worth noting. And we know that staff did outline those in their presentation. That included transposing the north and south elevations so that the garage volume, which was previously the portion of the proposed house closest to the adjacent grade 1 property, is located away from the neighboring grade 1 property, revising the volume of the floating mass and relocating it between the north and south wings rather than as an extension of the north wing, and reducing the total length of the building by 3.2 meters. Also increasing the front yard setback, which we heard during the presentation and in a subsequent question, by 2 meters, and the rear yard setback by 3.3 meters. Staff has determined that the proposal is now consistent with HCD standards. Reducing the size of the house and flipping it away from the north has created an extended landscape separating the neighborhood building, also producing a less prominent facade, along with the north property line and a deeper rear yard. The proposed design locates substantially more of the home on the southern edge of the site to reduce the impact on the neighboring designated house. Furthermore, on the north side of the property, the proposed home is set back over 23 meters from the property line to extend that its front end edge is in line with the rear yard of the adjacent property. This was done to help the existing neighbors maintain the park-like setting they currently enjoy. Staff argue that the heritage value of the district is conserved, and the proposal is designed to maintain most of the existing landscape features, including the extensive tree canopy, sloping grade, and dominance of soft landscaping. The new proposed building is sited to create more spacing between neighboring properties. Its 2-story height is consistent with the streetscape, and its rear 3-story height will be buffered with generous landscaping and setbacks. The largest challenge, which has been identified by the Residents Association, and with which I agree, revolves around the grading impact. As we heard from staff, grading is calculated through the zoning bylaw, which defines what constitutes a basement for zoning purposes. The only issue related to grade in the HCD plan is the policy that requires that existing grades be maintained. Therefore, that's the reason why under section 79 of the procedure bylaw, I introduced a motion that ensures we seek consistency between the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District Plan, the official plan, and the new zoning bylaw. And I know that Chair Leeper, in his capacity of Chair of Planning Committee, is proposing a motion, and I'll let him do that. But I have to say, I obviously will agree with. Okay. But in a sense, I know the motion talks about this coming to planning for discussion, and ultimately that was what I was conceiving of anyway in terms of the motion I had brought. In addition, I'm also introducing a direction to staff to ensure compliance with a heritage permit, specifically when approved landscape plans make up a significant reason to support a new building in a heritage conservation district. I'm pleased that this direction will protect not only applications such as the one before us, but all heritage permits that accompany specific landscape plans. As we know, the landscape holds just as many attributes to the culture and prominence of a heritage conservation district as the building or location itself. I trust that the committee will appreciate the efforts that we are making to further protect our heritage with some of these legislative actions. And I want to really thank the community for its continued input and indeed its endurance on multiple iterations of this project, which has led, in my estimation, to vast improvement. So I guess the first item before us is the motion the amending motion that I have introduced. Is that motion carried? Carried. Thank you so much. And is the direction to staff also carried? Thank you. Is your report carried?
Are you moving? Okay.
So is the report carried? So this report will be submitted to Ottawa City Council tomorrow for consideration. And I know that Councillor Leeper has a motion before us.
Thanks, Chair. And Chair King's motion has passed that Council ensure consistency with the objectives and policies of the official plan, Rockcliffe Park Secondary Plan, and Heritage Conservation District Plan be considered through the development of the new zoning bylaw. I'm moving that Therefore, be it resolved that the recommendation be referred to the Planning and Housing Committee for consideration at its next meeting. So the motion very specifically that the amending motion with respect to that consistency with the objectives and policies of the official plan, I'd like that to be referred to Planning Committee in addition to being passed by this committee for a brief discussion at our next Planning Committee meeting when the opportunity is there to have our land use planning planners on scene. Leslie and Louise, I hope you'll be able to attend as well on August 16th. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Chair Leeper. And I just want to clarify based on our input from our committee coordinator that this motion is just in reference to my motion and not the complete report. So is the motion put forward by Councillor Leeper carried? Oh, and I see that Member Quinn is raising her hand for a question.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry. I just wanted to be clear. The motion has now disappeared. Hang on a sec. I think I have it in front of me. Yeah, good. Thank you. No, I don't have it. So, yeah, whereas implications, yes. So the new comprehensive zoning bylaw is this is a little bit, I guess, like putting the kind of the cart before the horse a little bit here, are we? With this motion, I'm hoping that Councillor Leeper can clarify that, just because we don't have the comprehensive new zoning bylaw. So we're not, what are the implications potentially?
And that's exactly what I'm hoping we'll talk about at Planning Committee. We're in the course of developing a new comprehensive zoning bylaw, which will update the zoning for pretty much every property in Ottawa to be in line with the new official plan. This direction, the Councillor King's amending motion on this report that we've just carried speaks to, I think, an emphasis on consistency with a bunch of different Rockcliffe specific plans. And before we send staff away with a specific recommendation on treating the Rockcliffe secondary plan or the Rockcliffe Heritage Conservation District plan and its secondary plan, for instance, I'd just like the rest of Planning Committee to be able to weigh in, ask our city planners what kind of implications they expect that might have for what the final comprehensive zoning bylaw review would look like, and weigh in with additional direction if they feel it's appropriate on what the comprehensive zoning bylaw should look like for the properties in the Rockcliffe Heritage District conservation area. So that's, I don't anticipate it would be a long conversation, but if I want to have members of the team who are doing the comprehensive zoning bylaw review in front of us to talk to them about what they think the implications would be and provide an opportunity for the committee that is doing the comprehensive zoning bylaw review to add any additional instructions and color to planners as they go off on their work.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the extra explanation. Thanks.
That's a good question. Thank you.
Jeff.
Excellent. Thank you so much for the question, Member Quinn. So is Councillor Leeper's motion carried? Carried. Thank you so much. The next item on our agenda is status update, Built Heritage Committee inquiries and motions for the period ending June 23rd, 2023. There is no presentation on this item. There are no registered speakers and no correspondence. Does the committee have any questions for staff on this item? Seeing none, do any of the members have any comments on this item? And I see no hands. Is the report received? Received. Thank you so much. There are no in-camera items today. In terms of information previously distributed, there is an item on heritage impacts of the proposed provincial planning statement. There's no presentation on this item, but that information has been circulated to the full committee for its review. Are there any notices of motion? Seeing none, Are there any inquiries? Seeing none, under other business, we do have a planning circulation for zoning bylaw amendment and site plan control at 352 Somerset West, Somerset House. Is there any other business? Seeing none, on adjournment, is the motion carried? Thank you. We're adjourned. Thank you, everyone. We hope that everybody has a wonderful summer break. The next meeting is scheduled on Tuesday, September 12th, 2023.